Looking at Specsavers internationally, the first country we actually went into was Holland, the Netherlands. Fairly obvious, it was a good 12, probably 14 years ago now actually when I think about it. And it was a sort of an obvious mix. Number one, they speak English, which is very helpful if you've got the same language, and they're very good. The professional people are trained the same way as our optometrists are in the UK as well. Now, I can put up my hands and say little mistakes, because nobody, and I defy any company to say they've never made mistakes. There's already a very value operator who's been in Holland for many years. Now, it's easier to enter into for us, into a foreign market where prices are very high and people aren't visiting the optometrist very often because of that. So we go in with value prices, not necessarily the lowest prices, but value for money, and encourage people to come more often to the optician or the optometrist. That was already happening in Holland. So we've had more of a struggle there. Going into other countries internationally, you learn as you go through, and we learnt from Holland that because we were growing organically there, the same as in the UK and the Republic of Ireland. If you want to make a big impact and you need to go onto television and market the brand and do advertising, then you really have to go in with a big bang. You can't go in with one store and then the next month open another one, etc., etc. So it meant that when we went into, say, the Scandinavian countries, let's take Norway and Sweden first of all, what we did there was encourage independent opticians who were under their own name, Fred Smith or whatever the name would be there, to become a Specsavers and rebadge and refit and join the Specsavers family, basically. So Norway and Sweden went that way. So what we would do is get about 30 to 40 independent opticians, and then on sort of day one, they all start as Specsavers. So they're companies, practices that have already been going, and they're just rebadged, in other words, and then we grew from that. So you can open stores then. So you've got enough stores to actually advertise, because there's no point in spending thousands and thousands of pounds on television or magazines or newspapers when you've only got one store, because you're just wasting your money, basically. Brand is important. Obviously, in the UK, the brand is very well known now. I shouldn't think there was probably anyone who hadn't heard of it. They may not have all visited to Specsavers. I can't think why, but they certainly have heard of Specsavers anyway, and it's front of mind. So even if they've been to probably another optician, if they're stopped in the street on a questionnaire and asked to recall a name of an optician's store or on the high street, they will invariably say Specsavers, even if they don't go there. So the brand here, we look after it very, very well. You can't take these things for granted. You can't sit back and say, oh, well, that's it, because you will know in any business, a brand has only got to be one tiny thing that might upset something, and the brand will very quickly slip down the hill. So that it's well looked after here in the UK and the Republic of Ireland. But of course, the whole brand, it's not just the logo and the name, it's the whole experience as well inside a store. So as soon as you put your foot across the door, the advertising will get you to the doorstep. And then but the brand continues through the store of the way people are treated and the way staff behave towards the customer, etc., and how they have their eyes tested, right, the whole sort of visit until they leave. That is the whole essence of the brand. It's not just a matter of a logo and a name. I don't think any of us probably realised how popular it was going to be, but it's certainly, we needed a phrase, and we'd had phrases up to then, but nothing like that one. And that's another phrase that has to be protected, so that anybody running a business, if they have something like that, they have to get it registered and protected, or else these things are going to get copied. And in fact, it's used in all countries, even where they don't speak English. You get Norway and Sweden, they do have a certain level of English and they know exactly what it means. But it does take time to build. We're using it in Australia and New Zealand, but it's still not quite used by comedians and things like that. It's not used like that as yet, but we've only been there 2.5 years, and we've probably only been using that phrase now for probably 18 months or so. That does take time to build. My biggest worry is to keep the culture going right through every country. That is quite difficult. It requires a tremendous amount of communication. It requires everybody to sort of not waste time exactly, but board directors have to keep in touch with what's happening. They have to go to meetings, lead meetings. We have a big leadership program where we're bringing on our next leaders, and that has to be consistent across all countries as well. So the biggest challenge is the consistency across all stores in all countries, and also the culture in our support staff as well. It's a challenge, it's not impossible, but a lot of it is through communication, collaboration, it's just constant keeping in touch. And then that's the support staff and the stores. The other one is keeping in touch with our partners, because I'm in partnership with these thousands of optometrists in stores right around the world, is keeping in touch with them. For a lot of small businesses nowadays, there is a tremendous amount of red tape, and I know that the government is trying to sort of make it easier for small businesses. And I'm talking about businesses that are starting up and maybe have 3, 4 or 5 employees, and may never go further than that. That might be what they do. The red tape and the amount of stuff that they have to deal with is enormous, and it doesn't give them any time to get on with what they should be doing, which is looking after their 3 or 4 or 5 staff and doing whatever they're doing, whatever their business is, because they must spend 50% of their time just doing other things because somebody has told them they've got to do that form or whatever. And I really feel for small businesses on the sort of maternity and the paternity laws that are coming in. A small business cannot afford to lose somebody for a year or whatever. I mean, how can they manage? They just can't do it. And I think this sort of thing puts people off, and also the employment laws and whether they can't get rid of somebody if something's not working out without going to a tribunal. I mean, I'm being very general here, but I know, speaking to people, it's a tremendous worry, and they don't want to go in to open up their own businesses. And it's the small businesses in this country that actually are making the money for the country. If you have thousands and thousands of them, and if they all sort of could open up and take just 3 or 4 people into work, employees into work, there wouldn't be any unemployment. It would be great, and it would generate so much income for the country. But I know a lot of people just say, hands up, no, I can't do it. And I know people who've had businesses, and I'm talking about optics now, which is a small business if you're just an independent optician, 3 or 4 staff, and they've come near to retirement, so they've been 55 or whatever, and they've said, I can't take any more, I'm just closing up and getting out, and then all they do then is become a locum, a self-employed optician who goes around different optician shops and tests size. It makes me weep to see how they've given up because of the red tape that they've had to deal with. There is a lot said about women in business and glass ceilings. I have to admit that I've been very lucky because I've never worked for anybody but myself. Before Specsavers, I had a small group of opticians in Bristol in the West Country. So I came straight out of university, did my what they call a pre-registered year, which before you take your qualification exams, and then just set up on my own. And my husband set up as well, and we got married and we had two stores then, but a little bit different. We're talking way back a long time now, back in the sort of 60s, where you weren't allowed to use names like Specsavers, so you just had your own name above the door. So it's probably a little bit unfair of me to say that I've never encountered any resistance in a man's world, because I've never had to work for anybody else. People sort of say, oh, when are you going to retire? probably never. I'll have to wait for somebody very honest in the company to say, your time is up, you're useless, get out. And I'm sure my family would do. My children would definitely say that. So the day that they say that is probably the day they have to carry me out, basically.